Well, I'm very, very happy and privileged, in fact, to have Mark Demos talk to me today. Mark was in the Chaplain's Corps in the Rhodesian Army. And so I look forward to talking to you, Mark, about the spiritual side of soldiering, really. So welcome and thanks for your time.
No, I really appreciate, I was called up in 161, which was probably February of 1978. Forgive my memory, my memory, and try to remember dates and the exact names and etc. is a little bit difficult at times for me, and I'm sure it is for a lot of us. But went in 161, February of 78, and was really somewhat gung-ho. I went on the officer selection board and spent a few weeks on that. And then I was called in to be asked what's wrong with my leg. And I didn't know I was having any problems other than, when I was young, I'd severed the main tendon in my leg. And I guess someone had observed that my leg lagged, after a route march, maybe 20 miles or something. And within a week I was out. They basically thought I'd be a liability. And so for the next month or so, I, every day was at the ammunition dump, sitting on top of the towers at Llewellyn on guard duty, every day for a lot of the day. And eventually I got transferred to the Chaplain's Corps. They needed pretty much a general dog's body just to do anything and everything. And I ended up getting to do a lot of just amazing things with amazing people whose hearts, whose lives and hearts were so invested, in all that went on during that time. I've often thought about, the chaplains, the people like Colonel Wood and Bill Dodgen and Bill Blakeway and Val Roger and a lot of the others, how much of what, if they were in a church, they would do maybe 10 funerals a year, 10 weddings a year, but this was so compressed in so many ways that it really, the result and the stress on them was just immense. But they were just all amazing people, the whole office there, the staff, the chaplains. We had American chaplains, I think a guy called Chuck McDaniel, and there were quite a few others, and I try to write them down before we came on. Tim Salmon, Stan Hannon, who's in Florida now. Norman Wood is in Florida. He was the chaplain general. But they truly were, amazing people. And for me to be able to be part of that in the small way that I was, really formed so much of what I do today. So I was very deeply grateful.
Mark, you mentioned Colonel Wood, and I remember him from my RhA days, and I'll never forget it, really, And, what I'm going to say about him, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I think the Rhodesian Army actually handled the spiritual side of things quite well, because I remember on, I think it was a Friday, it was compulsory to go and hear the chaplain speak, and it was Colonel Wood who spoke to us, and it was quite funny because he could see we were all exhausted, and I remember him saying, "Listen, I know why you're here, because you've got to be here, but if you're not interested in what I'm going to say, go to the back and sleep, and if you want to hear what I'm going to say, come to the fore." So it wasn't in your face. And, that's very different to what one gathers about the South African Army, where religion was very much imposed on people. And I think that's a mistake. In the Rhodesian Army, the chaplains were there and the religious side was available, but it was really left up to the individual to embrace that option. And I think that's probably quite a good way to handle the religious side of things in the military.
Yeah, and I think Colonel Wood, we'd known him from childhood, and or my dad had, our family had. And he really was, he was a man of deep conviction and deep faith, but he was just, he was also a man that said, look, this is, if you want it, you can have it. If you don't want it, there's nothing I can do to force it on you. But whatever opportunities, I can provide for you, or, counsel or direction, faith, I'll do. And I think he ran the chaplain's corps like that as well. There were always a few people who were a little bit more gung-ho, and some who, were just there because they almost had to be there. But, almost all of them were just men of incredible character, integrity, and their heart was in what they were doing, no matter how hard it was on their families, having to go do death notifications, to the weddings, the funerals, counseling troops, counseling families who had lost. These were really exceptional men. They really were. And I think the approach was right. I think trying to force something on anybody at any time in life makes no sense at all. You can present it and assume the other person has ears and a brain and a heart. And if they want to respond to it, that's their choice. And maybe they won't respond to it now, but maybe they will an hour later when they chop it out of there and they're facing something that they never believed they'd face. They get to make that choice. No one else does for them.
Mark, just go back a bit. I want to ask you about Sanger Lodge and Dick Paget.
Yeah.
Who I don't think was a wildly religious man, but it was a place for physical and spiritual healing. So there was a religious side to it. But just tell us a bit about Dick Paget and Sanger Lodge.
One of the really cool parts of being in the chaplain's corps was you got to travel, around the country. You were traveling generally in a staff car, sometimes a Land Rover. And what I had to do is essentially ride shotgun. The chaplains would drive. And so about once a month or more, we would go up to Sanger Lodge. And I'll just give you a quick story. One of the trips up there, we were told to go to St. Giles to pick up some soldiers to take them up to Sanger Lodge. So we get to St. Giles and we pick up 3 soldiers. One had blown out his eyes and hands and whatever with a white phosphorus grenade, I guess, that had gone off in his hand. And a soldier who had blown a leg off. And then an African soldier who was really just, we had to put him in a stretcher, put him in the back, and then go on the ride up to Nyanga and then up to Sanger. And wasn't much speaking on the way up there. I had the chaplain, driving, and I was, I had a weapon. And so as soon as we get up to Sanger Lodge, Dick Paget basically met us when we got there and said, hey, don't get out. We're going down to Troutbeck and we're going to have a drink, want to get to know you guys. And, it was a very affable guy, really was. He had run an outward bound school before the war, so he wasn't, he wasn't related. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't really a soldier. He was just, this was his outward bound school. So we go down back to Troutbeck and spend a bit of time, and he gets to know the guys and basically tells them what's going to happen each day. And probably 6 o'clock at night, and this is in Nyanga. This is in June, July, probably. It's very cold, and so we go back to the Jeep, and, I'm opening the back and trying to get these guys in. And Lieutenant Paget said, no, close the door. You guys stay right where you are. So he tells the chaplain to get in, and he gets in. And he basically said to the guys, he said, you know how to get up to Sanger, and you figure out a way to get up there. The chaplain didn't know quite what to say. But it was probably a half a mile at the most. But this is 6 o'clock. It's getting dark. And this wasn't exactly an area where there was no activity either. So essentially you had this blind guy, this one guy with one leg, and the African who was really on a stretcher. And it was almost like a movie, trying to, even see this and watch this, sort of stuff happen. But, we drove back. I was a private. I had nothing to say, get in, and I drive back, and we get up there, and, I waited up probably till about 10 o'clock. The guys got in. But next morning at breakfast, everything goes normal. And probably later that day, Dick Padgett basically says, "Where are these guys? I want to know where they are." And so the guy with the one leg, who had the leg blown off an AP mine, was at breakfast, and he had been at lunch, but the other two guys were not. So the first thing he does is he goes into the guy who had lost his eyes, and these, you got to understand, were essentially rejects from St. Giles. They couldn't do anything with them at St. Giles. They had been there for a long period of time, and there would just be no improvement. So they were sent on as, we can't help you kind of patients. So the first thing Dick does, with the chaplain standing there and me standing there, was talk to the blind guy, who's really hunched in the corner, just rocking back and forth. He was really psychologically pretty damaged. And Dick Padgett says, enough of that. He said, "You're making everybody in this room uncomfortable with your birdie imitation. It's time for you to get up, stand up, go and eat. Dinner's going to be in about an hour's time. Get on with it." Chaplain about lost it. I mean, he, and most of these chaplains, some of which were mild-mannered, which this guy was, but wasn't terribly impressed with what Dick Padgett said. Next, we go into the young African soldier who's still lying in bed, and he's lying in mess. I mean, he had messed himself and just quiet. And Dick Padgett does the same thing on him, saying, "You know what? This room smells. No one needs you sitting in this room smelling, not going to the bathroom. If you have to crawl, but get there. Ask for help, but you can't sit here on your own crap." He said, "If you choose not to, I'll show you behind the stables. There's a way you can get through the fence, and maybe you just crawl out and go." And the chaplain honestly just basically, was trying to intervene. And Dick Padgett said, "Look, this is my show. You may be a captain. I'm a lieutenant, but this is my command." So the chaplain threatened all manner of, when I go back to base, I'm going to have you kicked out. I'm going to let them know what you're doing, and the whole bit. Anyhow, so we drive back after doing the service, and I guess the chaplain did what he did. Fell on deaf ears. But I went back with another chaplain, probably around Christmas, to do Christmas services. And one of the first things I saw when we got there was, I go down to the pool after driving up there to go jump in the pool. And I see the blind soldier. I mean, he's in the swimming pool. I see the guy, the young African soldier, he's splashed around and in a tube. He's a totally different guy. And then the other one's riding a horse. The next, I see him on a horse. They used to have these great horses up there that they'd take him around down to Troutbeck and stuff. And all three of them were completely different people in that 6-month period. And the chaplain started asking Dick Padgett about how he had done what he had done with these three guys. And he basically said, "It's no different from any other man I come up here. I tell them, there's nothing I can do for you. I can't get you a new leg. I can't get you new eyes. I can't, help you have children if you, have parts blown off. I can't do anything for you. What's gone is gone. What's done is done." And he said, what I take them through is I do an analysis of asset with them. I say, "So what have you got? How can you use it? And how can we get you back into the world to be able to take what you've got? Let's take a baseline, but let's analyze what you've got up here. Let's analyze, how you connect with people. Let's analyze what you could do in school or in college or whatever else, or at a trade." Analysis of your assets, not of your deficits. You can do nothing with what you've lost, but I can help you build a life with what you've got.
Right.
And I took that with me and for years used that as a basis really of everything I do in terms of working with people with addiction, with severe trauma, with PTSD, with patients who have been raped, with survivors of murder, family members who have been murdered. It doesn't really matter. It starts with the same analysis.
Right.
You know, you can understand pain and you can walk them through that and take them through that, but eventually you've got to get to the place of, so how are you going to live now? What's the basis in which you can take what you have and give it to other people? And I wrote a book about it. Based on that philosophy, I created programs for inner city schools, for addiction programs and drug courts, all based on that same philosophy. But so that, maybe that helps explain who Dick Paget is, but he's an absolutely just amazing man, or was an amazing man. I think he's passed on now. I'm not sure.
Wow, that's quite a story. I suppose that's what you call tough love.
It is. It really is. But I think Dick had a deep compassion as well. And
yes.
I think he realized that simply trying to understand the loss that these guys had really had an expiration date, that there comes a time where you've got to again say, we're sorry for what's happened. We wish it never happened. Your lives have forever changed. But what can you take in your own hands and your own lives now and say, either I leave this life and I take my own hand and take my life, or I get on with it. And, and I honestly do. I take those very words in a lot of cases, even in cases where men are thinking of divorcing their wives or they're alcoholics. And I basically say, you either get this right or get out of the situation. You're going to kill yourself by, I've had two clients recently who've had 3 drunken driving accidents in a row. I mean, they're on the verge of either killing somebody or being killed. And I basically told them, I said, look, your life, your wife, your families don't need who you are. If you want to change what you have and where you are with this alcoholism, either let's help you deal with it, or I said, just go. Do everyone a favor and just go. How you go is up to you, but get out of the situation. And it's been more helpful, or been helpful in more cases than simply trying to, oh, I'm so sorry. I understand your pain and this loss, and all of which are real and all of which are horrific in many ways. But ultimately, what you have and what's been put inside of you, and this is a spiritual belief I have, and that what God's put in you, no man can take out of you, in terms of you have talent regardless, and that talent has a place where it's got to be used and given to other people. So that's in terms of my philosophy and what Dick Paget taught me.
Well, you get me thinking, Mark, because when I look at the world, I sometimes think to myself that there's almost too much compassion. Everybody seems to have a problem. And a lot of these problems don't appear to me to be that serious. But the reaction from the senior sort of generation is one of, well, you need help. You need help. There's not enough emphasis on, hey, you've got this much going right for yourself. Why don't you take the positives and do something with your life instead of complaining about all the negatives?
That's right. There's not a one of us who hasn't had loss in their lives. I mean, some more, some less, but we've all had loss. We've all had trauma. We've all had things we wish had not happened to us. We've all had people do things to us which we wish had never happened. That's the world in which we live. But how we negotiate and navigate that world ultimately, in my mind, comes to, what have I got that I can give to another person and impact their lives with? It's not simply an analysis of asset, but the asset is discovered and identified for the very specific purpose of saying, how do I give it, and how do I, whether it's in a corporation, whether it's as a doctor, whether it's as a teacher, doesn't really matter what it is, as a mother helping her kids, what have you got that you're exceptional at, that you can give to others who need what you have? And ultimately, that, I think, is what changes the equation with any life.
You know, Mark, I think when I look back on the Rhodesian experience, I think what we all came out of that having learnt was actually how good life can be when dealing with adversity and shortages. You know, life wasn't that easy, and yet the majority of people managed to get their heads around the fact that you've got to make the most of what you've got and don't worry too much about what you haven't got. And it's amazing how good life can be. And I think that's what brought our community together in such a strong way. And I look at the world today and I just think, you know, people would be a lot happier if they focused more on what's going right than on what's going wrong. But it just seems to have swung in the other direction.
It has. I think growing up, there was never a time to be a victim, just in general. I mean, I think part of the Rhodesian DNA was that we always believed there was a way to get something, we could get something done.
Yes.
And it didn't matter what that was. I think that was, put into us as kids, put into us in the schools we went to.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't allowed to have excuses that were either childish, weak. It was strict. Sometimes, I've spoken to some people, we have a lot of people from Mount Pleasant High School, right where I live here in Dallas. Yeah, and a few of them used to talk about Mr. Lambert and how he used to terrorize the students. Lambert was the headmaster. My brother went there, my sister went there. I went to St. George's down the road, but it didn't matter because every one of them still remembers him with respect,
yes,
with clear guidelines,
mm-hmm.
with what will happen if you do not do what everybody else is required to do. You don't just get an exemption because you don't feel like you fit in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to do, and you've got to be that. It's teamwork as much as anything. You have an identity as a school. You have blazers. You have uniforms. And we had special identities because we competed against each other. We wanted to be the best, not to be seen for what we were not, and for how we can classify ourselves as victims. And I think what we live in is a world where virtue is found by claiming victimhood. And I'm special because I'm a victim now.
Yes.
And that only ends in what we have now in young people killing themselves, and people, either by their own hand, by their own choice, or doing fentanyl and dying, or, drugs, or, ultimately, a lot of them just don't come out their rooms. They're scared to get out in the stage of life, and even, they just don't want to navigate it. They're petrified. And I don't think we were. We always knew there was a way to do it, and we were always encouraged to find that way.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, Mark. Mark, going on from that, well, you would know probably better than I do, but in the whole Rhodesian psyche, there was an aversion to seeking help because it was a cowboys don't cry society where
I live in Texas.
Dry your eyes and don't complain. But there were obviously lots of people who did need help, who were probably a little bit reluctant to come forward and ask for help. Was that your experience?
Yeah, very much. And I think that's a lot of why I decided back then that my future, my career would be either as a psychologist or in ministry, or, I'll tell you a story, and it's somewhat hard to tell. I had a friend, Alan Heathcote, who was a medic in the Army. We'd grown together. He went to Oral, St. George's, played cricket together, and we're driving down the Borrowdale Road, probably in, I'm trying to think, 78, 79, I can't remember. And we saw this Peugeot staff car basically had driven off the road. And we stopped and got out, and inside of it was General Hickman. And I'd grown up with Richard, his son. I mean, we went same class together growing up at Alexandra Park, and we knew the family well, and my dad knew John Hickman well. And we found him basically in his car on the side of the road. And, you know, I can't specifically go back my memory to say this is exactly what happened, but it looked like the man had been crying. It looked like the man was just sitting there defeated. He just lost his son, you know. And Alan and I managed to push his car out, and he said thank you, and he carried on. But, you know, even at the highest rank,
yeah,
you know, you could have had a son who could have been pushed into the chaplain school, quite frankly, could have been, you know, in the medic school at KG6 taking blood.
Yeah.
Richard, you know, Richard was a hero, and, you know, he wanted to be, he wanted to be a man, and he wanted to give, you know, and he really was. He was a good man. And so was his dad, you know. It was really one of the things you never forget in life.
Yeah. Mark, how much did you deal with soldiers struggling with trauma and with nervous issues?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that would happen every morning, you'd go into the chaplain's call, and we'd have these 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of all the noticasts, you know, notification of casualties, notification of deaths. And there were 2 things that we would do. You know, as an assistant, I would very often go to the hospitals and just sit with these guys and talk with them. Again, guys who had lost arms, legs, you know, just massive physical trauma. Got to see a lot of childhood friends, you know, in hospital as well. And I, you know, and was always trying to talk to them. And even then, there was always this bravado and this kind of gusto about them. But there were opportunities, and there were certain people you would connect with, and you would go in and see on a regular basis, because you knew they wanted to talk about, you know, what had happened and their families and how worried they were about their families. And could we get gas or petrol coupons, you know, to a parent so they could come see the child in hospital and things like that. And then the second part of what I did, not as frequently, was I would drive chaplains to do death notifications. So I'd drive in the staff car and go with them. And that, of all the things, affected me probably more deeply than anything, you know, really in my life. I was not the one doing the notifications, but sometimes the chaplain would have me sit in the car, sometimes go with them to the front door and sit. And I've done that in many different ways since then. As a minister, as I've worked at, but volunteered at police departments, and have done that many, many times through the years. And it's something I dread, but something that I know I'm good at, because once I'm called to do it, you know, I do it. I get into that space and I'm able to do it and able to really help the families receive the worst news that they could ever receive. So, you know, one of the things that I really wanted to do when I was in the chaplain school was to go and study psychology. And, you know, what was really a great blessing to me is right at the end of my national service, we got to escort a group from America from a Christian college called Liberty University. And for 3 weeks, we got to drive around a guy called Sergeant Miles, who was this big old Scotsman with a beard and the whole thing, great guy. A guy called Kerry and I were in the Land Rover, and we met them at the Botswana border, and we drove the entire country for 3 weeks. You know, 2-3 times a day they would sing and the guy would preach. And they offered me a foreign scholarship to go across to Virginia. And so I did my undergraduate and graduate there, and before I came back to South Africa. And, you know, did counseling, but did ministry and many other things. But that was one of the great parts of, you know, being able to be in the chaplain's corps, what resulted in. And so I was really very blessed that, you know, for that to have happened in my life. So, yeah, and I think, you know, I often think, because I still get to meet a lot of guys who were soldiers. I was in the military. I was never a soldier. I think I got shot at twice. Once when I was, sent off to drive an old crocodile, a troop carrier, and a bunch of Par-2. Yeah, and they were supposed to go have a party out in the middle of nowhere and shout and scream, and an old abandoned school, and we got shot at, and it wasn't the most pleasant experience. I think I just hid behind the wall. That's all we're supposed to do. But I don't consider myself, but my brother was a soldier. He was an RLI at the age of 16. Man of incredible courage. Even to this day, it's just got this thing about him that endures, that pushes harder. He's running ultra marathons at the age of 67, and triathlons and everything, and just an amazing man. But I think there was always we all grew up in this almost Camelot, this place of where the air was clean and the weather was great, and we all knew what was required of us, and we were able to rally around the flag, and we were able to have an identity and have a purpose, even for a few years. But to realize our families had built this country, and then I think everybody that was part of that country has suffered trauma to some extent, because a dream that we all had and a dream everyone fought for was something we lost. And I don't think anybody's really found what we know we lost.
I think you're absolutely right there. I think in some shape or form, we've all suffered some trauma. And actually, the older you get, the worse it gets in a way, I think. I think a lot of us in our sort of older age are more upset about what happened than we probably were at the time. I don't know. It's something that certainly never left me.
I think it's true. There's C.S. Lewis, the great British writer, talked about, how the pain of this life, one of the things it does for us is it gives us somehow, it echoes in our minds to give us a belief that no matter how good or how bad, that we never really fit in this world. There's something, we were not made for this world. No matter how great, beautiful, brilliant, no matter what great experiences we had, but we were made for another world. And I think I get solace from that. I have passwords in my computers that, they're all about growing up, whether the school I went to, whether the address that I grew up at, and it's different variations of that. It takes me back every time I log in to a place where I felt safe, and a place where I grew up, and a place where, my mom and dad were, and my sister and my brother, and, and just the feeling of winter coming on and the thunderstorms and just all of that, no matter what it was, whether it was sensory and weather but there was everything in many ways that was right in the middle of hell. Of so many of the guys who had to go fight, and the devastation and the sadness, but yet there was something amazing to be able to be part of that. And as I said, I'm part of Dallas I'm at, but then a mile of me, I have someone who grew up in the same street as me, Harold Beck, right by Mount Pleasant High School at the top of Chudley Road. I have Henry Stock, who they had big ranches in Bulawayo and beyond. There must be 20 people at the Starbucks I go to who were brought up in Salisbury. One neighbor down went to girls' high school. It's just, and I'm moving, but everybody has the same, the same experience, the same heart. hole in us that doesn't matter how much you dream of it, will never come back, will never be part of our lives again.
Mark, on the whole, the chaps that you were dealing with who'd been wounded and stuff, were they positive about the future? How did they react to the fact that they were now casualties?
You know, some of them, there was always a sense of bravado, you know, that I think, you know, when you've got a bunch of nurses around, it's easy to show how brave and how tough you are. But there were many soldiers, you know, who would suffer real depression. You know, soldiers who would try and find a way out to kill themselves. You know, there was all of that. But I think one of the things it just always seemed with Rhodesians, and this was black and white. We visited black soldiers, white soldiers, Indian soldiers. Didn't really matter. Yeah, I mean, we visited everyone. But there always seemed to be a bravado, or even in many, a gratitude that, you know, they had done what they were called on to do. Some of them couldn't reconcile, you know, really what had happened to them, to their futures. They couldn't really see a way forward. And that was part of just being able to talk to them and somehow give them some hope. You know, obviously with the chaplain's corps, we'd give them Bibles, and we'd always try and pray with them and try and bring some sort of optimism. And, you know, in some cases it was desperately hard, but in a lot of cases it worked. And a lot of people came through that to a new life, another life, with great loss and with great courage in their choice to move forward, immense courage.
Well, hats off to you, Mark. Must have been a very, very tough job indeed. I think if I had a choice, I'd rather been out in the bush being shot at than dealing with that sort of stuff. I mean, that's tough work. But Mark, just I know Norman Wood and Derry McIntyre had quite an interesting relationship.
Norman Wood was, I mean, he really was. He was a very positive man. He was just a very charismatic man. I think the guy could have been a movie star.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was always cracking jokes. But he would come in the morning sometimes, and Margie Miles, who was the other sergeant who basically ran the office, kind of big, buxom, blonde, you know, a Scottish woman as well. And we had John Miles, everyone thought she was married to, but Margie would be behind the desk. And Norman or Colonel Wood would come in, and he would just be holding court in the offices there. And Margie would normally answer the phones, but you know, often Norman Wood or Colonel Wood would pick up the phone and he would say, "Hey, darling, what are you doing for lunch?" Or, "Hey, darling, you're looking beautiful today." And only one time did I see Colonel Wood have no words. I mean, he went very quiet very quickly. And he almost, you know, stood up, you know, at attention. And yes, General McIntyre, yes, you know, and it just, everyone in the office just, it was very obvious what had happened. But,
well, he was getting a rap over the knuckles for something.
You know, I think he was well respected, but I think there was some of the older, maybe not older, but there was still this old British mentality, and rank meant something and protocols meant something. But there were, yeah, we often had things of real levity that happened in the chaplain squad. I'll tell you one quick story. You know, we get called to go pick up all this stuff from the railway station, these 500 boxes sent from the USA, some group that was supporting the troops. So we go get these 500 boxes. We go put them in the garage at the chaplain's quarters at a house at KG6 Barracks. And Colonel Wood says, "Someone go get me one of those boxes." So go get a box and bring it in, and he opens it up, and there's a Bible on top, and there's some Hershey's American candy bars. And then he pulls out the latest, or, you know, last month's copy of Playboy magazine. And every one of those 500 boxes had a Playboy magazine in it. And I think they were actually banned in the country at that time.
I think they were, yeah.
And so there was this conundrum, Norman kind of laughed about it, but some of the other chaplains were, somewhat incensed that these were sent to the chaplain's school, and we had no idea what to do with them. And so we basically had to lock the garage, and I don't know what the disposition eventually was with them. But yeah, we were supposed to take these to the guys in the hospital and different the medical facilities, wherever we went. But what are you supposed to go do? Take all the Playboys out, and then you got a stack of 500 Playboys sitting at the chaplain's school. But there was actually a lot of levity that went on there, and a lot of just funny things like Norman and Derry McIntyre, and also some very serious things that happened that turned out to be funny later. I don't know if you remember when President Rothwell died, and Norman was part of the state funeral, and soon after we got the ashes of President Rothwell. And we would keep them in a big filing cabinet in the back office. And Colonel Wood said, okay, Mrs. Rothwell's coming in to collect the ashes today. Get them out. Let's put them in a nice container. And so we go looking for the ashes, and no one can find the ashes. It's like a banana republic. Yeah. You've got the ashes of the president who just died, and no one knows where the ashes are. And he basically had to postpone it. And for the next 3 days, we looked high and low. And eventually it was found out Margie Miles, who was sat at the front desk, had locked them in the desk for safekeeping, and she'd gone on a week vacation. But you think, I've lost the president's ashes. What are we going to do? So, it was good. I mean, it was a whole nother world and a whole nother way of life. But
Mark, somebody was looking after you when you were in Kariba. It could have been the end.
It was. One of the things we did a number of times when I was there was we were ordered, just like I did with that American singing group. It was normally 3 of us would go and would take care of like a Scripture Union camp, or some Christian organization would ask us to go kind of take them somewhere. So got to go on a week with the Scripture Union camp up at Kariba in August, September holidays. And I was with a guy called Mish Robb, who, he's an assistant chaplain, great musician, and another guy. And at the end of the camp, I had asked for permission to be able to fly back to Salisbury, because my dad had a company called Tricon. It was all this prefab housing and walls and everything. And he had a big stand at the Salisbury show, and they would have kind of a closing up party and everything. So I got permission and went off to the airport. And when I got to the airport, as soon as I got there, I was told I had to go back to the Scripture Union where they were having the camp, because there'd been some terrorist activity in the area, and they thought they needed me. So even though I had a ticket, I was scheduled to go, I didn't get to go, and took the Scripture Union camp back. And that was the Hinyani that got shot down that day. And, my dad, I think, it took us a few hours to drive back, to ride back from Kariba. I mean, it wasn't just a quick trip. And I think the news had gotten out as well of what had happened, and my dad still thought that I was flying back.
Sure.
And but I was not. And why and how and why, I was spared that, I don't know, but I'm deeply grateful. And but yet, for so many who lost on that day, and the tragedy of what happened even after, those that have survived, what happened to them. But I'm always deeply grateful. I have no idea how or why, but I was needed back. Yeah.
Mark, are you dealing with traumatized military people today? Do you involve yourself with that?
Yeah, we've been American people from Vietnam, Iraq, and various other places. But you know, when you walk around in America, you can still see the old Vietnam vets. You know, they still have a real pride. They'll wear the Vietnam kind of caps, and you know, which tells you when they were there, where they were, you know, what they were doing. And but I've worked and volunteered at a number of police departments, many of which have ex-military. You know, one of the pathways out of the military into, you know, a job is to go into the police. And my sister, who went to Mount Pleasant and she got a PhD here in Texas, she's dealt with a lot of them through the years as well. So yeah, we have, and I have. So yeah, and it lasts. What goes on? I'll throw in a real quick story. About a year ago, during COVID, I was watching a movie by Mel Gibson called When We Were Soldiers. And again, I'm not a soldier. I never was. But, you know, I was sitting watching it with my wife. And much of the story was about these women living on a military base. And so many of them waited for the chaplain or the two people to come turn up and knock on their doors. You know, and I just burst into tears for probably half an hour to an hour. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't, you know, I'm sitting here trying to hold it back, and it just flooded out of me. And it wasn't from my trauma. It was from going with chaplains and being in the car and watching them go to the front door or standing with them. You know, and yet it's, you know, this is 40 odd years later.
Yeah.
And yet it still touches.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
It's life, you know, but it's hard. And I think for all the losses any of us have had, and for any situation we've ever been put in, when we lose sight of the belief that we still have talent given to us from Gaga, that we still have talent, and we still have breath, and we still have the capacity to look outside of our lives, to look at where we can impact others' lives.
Yeah.
When we lose that, everything's gone.
Right.
And you know, what you're doing in this program, you know, I've gone through and watched a lot of episodes. My brother's watched a lot of them. He lives in South Africa. You know, what you're doing, I think, in many ways is therapy for a lot of the men who come on here. I think it's a lot of, you know, it really touches the lives of so many who watch it as well. Right. You're using the talents you have with media we have now to deeply impact lives. You have no idea what happens when people sign off and when people sit in their chairs for hours afterwards and they see the hope of some guy who's gone on and he's gotten his life together, or you know, or who still grieves like they grieve.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark. You know, I think for a lot of people, just the fact that they've had a chance to talk about issues and experiences has been good for them. Yeah. And so, you know, I'm really pleased about that. It might have made life a bit easier for some of the people involved, and that makes me I'm very pleased about that indeed.
Well, I think what it gives to them is to say, was it worth it? And in many ways it wasn't, but it was, because you look around the world today, nobody stands for anything. Nobody is loyal to anyone. Yeah. You know, I have an American flag out the front of my house here, right on top of the stairs. And I'll go many mornings, and it's been ripped down, thrown down. I'll go out and I put it out every day. I became a citizen eventually last year after living here for many years. But, you know, I am deeply grateful with all the madness that's going on in this country for the life that it's given me. Yeah. And for the opportunities that it's given me. And I'm still deeply, you know, grateful for what I have. And we've been given much, and I have an amazing wife. I have 3 wonderful children. And, you know, we can talk about, we can think about all the loss. You know, my grandfather had a ranch in West Nick. My aunt and uncle took it over, you know, they bought it and they lost it. They got run off, you know, they killed, they hamstrung the cows. My cousin almost got shot. Well, he got shot. They burned down the ranch. I mean, you can look at that and you can remember, and you can look at all the pictures and say, you know, 30,000 acres just lies barren now. And we can go through all the losses and the friends we had. And you can think of Kevin Lawler, who I opened the batting with at St. George's in the first team for a couple of years. And he dies 6 months after the war's over. Hits a landmine. You know, the war's over. Why? You know, and David Friedman and Richard Hickman, people I grew up with as a child who I lived right near. But yet there's still life to be lived.
Yeah.
And what gives us a richness of life going forward and a compassion for others is to take that pain and to take that sadness. But it also, I think, ultimately gets down to what have I got to give to others to make their lives more and bigger than they are today. I can't find another pathway to another formula or story to tell people other than that, to create meaning and purpose in life. And to not look back, but that's part of who we are. It's just so ingrained in us, but that gives us the strength of character and power to impact lives.
Well, Mark, it's been very, very interesting, very enlightening, and I've no doubt a lot of people are going to take something out of listening to what you've said today. So thank you very much indeed for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for what you did for those guys back in the day. Geez, it must have been a very tough job. I don't envy. Not one bit.
I appreciate that.
Cheers, Mark.
Thank you. And thanks so much for all you do. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers, buddy.